Well, hello. It is good to see you again. It's hard to believe with Module 4 starting this week that we are now more than halfway through the course and it's going to be downhill from there. So everything you need to know for the first half of Module 4 is now open, and by now the routine should be very familiar to you. But before I move on with the rest of Module 4, it's really important to remember that you're still in the middle of your group work with the assignment to analyze Psalm 46. And so a link to that group forum is provided at Module 4. So you need to make sure you keep working on that. Now, with Module 4, we're going to start looking at the book of Job, which will take up the next two modules. The focus of Module 4 is to get an overview of the content of Job and to learn more about some of the specific topics in Job. So to help do that, go to the Module 4 page and click on Start Here, and then that will tell you everything you need to know for the Module 4 reading exam. And then you have 3 pages, each with a specific content and attention given to what you need to study for the exam. So the first one is a reading guide aiding you in reading the book of Job. Then time is limited. We don't have time to read all 42 chapters. The reading guide provides questions on 10 chapters selected through the book of Job that will help you, to delve in the details of some of the important topics of the book in the 10 chapters. You are free, of course, to read the entire book if you do have the time. Then following that, there was a very short, about 20-minute lecture by John Walton when he came here, Harvard University. Well, when I say here, I mean um, here in Harvard University on cyberspace at us, but he came in Arkansas 2012 to give a series of lectures, and one was on Job. And this lecture actually is a really good nutshell examination of the topic in the book that John Walton wrote, How to Read Job, that is required for this class. So this video will give you a really good chance to do a survey of the major topic that would then be fleshed out in the book by John Walton. To try to be as user-friendly as possible, the video does have subtitles added, and I also provided a transcript of the entire video and a reading guide. And then following that, the final piece of the puzzle to study for the exam is the book that John Walton wrote, How to Read Job. That book, you can get a link to that book on HU Direct Access. That by now should be familiar. There are 4 parts to John Walton's book, but in this module, we're going to read the first 2 parts. And the first 2 parts contain 10 chapters. Each chapter is basically like a lecture in like 3 or 4 pages, 3, 4, 5 pages, and each lecture is on a specific topic of Job. So it's best to consider John Walton's book as like written lecture notes that otherwise would be given in class. And I know it's going to take some time, like 6 to 8 hours, but I think giving you lecture notes in written format will really help speed up and expedite the learning process. There's no reading guide on John Walton's book, but as I mentioned there are 10 chapters, and just be familiar with the main point being made in each of the 10 chapters. Pay attention to what Walton's view is. So, for example, there's one chapter on the Tan, the Hebrew word that's translated as station in some English translations, but translated differently in others. And so when you read that chapter, you want to know what are some of the major topics in considering the Tan, but then what does Walton think? And so if you know that for each of the 10 chapters, you'll do well for the test. The test will have at least one question in all 10 chapters. Some chapters might have 2, some might have 3. So make sure you're balanced in reading the 10 chapters. And that's basically it for the first half of Job. It's just getting to know the material. To help you get oriented, I think it's very helpful to think of the concept of dialogue when we're thinking about Job. When we talk about dialogue, we're talking about engaging in a conversation that examines an issue from different perspectives, especially an issue that defies complete understanding, something that only God would know. So that's the dialogue, is just exploring different points of view of wisdom. And so the book of Job can be considered dialogue on two different levels. Number one, there's dialogue within the book of Job, where most of the book is basically a series of conversation in artful, poetic style of the views of Job and of his three friends. An interloper appears, and then God appears. And so there's a dialogue within the book that examines different truth claims. But another way that Job covers dialogue is the book itself is in dialogue with Proverbs and with Ecclesiastes, as was described in the textbook Grasping God's Word. So keep that in mind, because we'll return to the concept of dialogue in the academic forum and in next week. So until then, have a great time reading the book of Job, and I hope that you're able to benefit by understanding Job in a new light. Because, quite frankly, if you're like me, poetry is not something that comes natural to me. I prefer narrative, and then things that are cut and dried, like legal narrative, things like that. And so usually with poetry, I skim or I skip. And I have to tell you, reading when I was growing up, reading Book of Job, and even in college, and even in graduate school, the early part, I would read chapters 1 and 2 because that's just good narrative that is very readable. And then I go to chapter 3, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? This is poetry. And so I skip poetry, so I'll keep flipping. It's poetry, poetry, poetry. Oh my goodness. Until the very end, where the last, like, 8 or 9 verses, it's narrative. And so I read that. I don't know if that reflects your experience, but I think a lot of us, if we even know anything about Job at all, we're more familiar with the first two chapters. In the end, and then we met out on the dialogue and some of the most profound and poetic engagement of issues. And what's really surprising is the issue is really not completely primarily about suffering, but something more profound is how do we think about God when we suffer, and what is the implications of that? What can we know about God, and things like that. So, for all those reasons, I think the Book of Job is very rich and thick, and it's something that I hope you begin to appreciate. So, even though we can't cover everything in the book, I'm hoping that the resources will help, uncover some of the valuable parts of the book, and then you can continue the uncovering in the next module and then after the course. And so with that, have fun reading Job. Do not hesitate to reach out to me anytime if you want to talk about what you've read in the book, or if you have questions about what's going on in class. Okay, and then stay tuned, because the second half of this module will be published right after you finish the reading exam. Okay, all right, well, adios and farewell.